Hello, my name is Kent Anderson. I'm with the Global Beef Genetics Tech Services Group with Zoetis. First, I want to, on behalf of Zoetis, thank the American Angus Association and Angus Genetics Inc. for the opportunity to contribute to this learning lounge and to visit with you a little today about the value of HD50K and GeneMax Advantage for both seed stock producers as well as commercial users of Angus genetics. At Zoetis, one of the fundamental building blocks of our strategic planning is the assumption that in the future, agriculture is going to be more and more about farming data. For those of you that are Angus seed stock breeders, this is nothing new. After all, for decades, you've submitted performance data, pedigree information, and you've used tools like the Angus Sire Selector to find bulls that most easily and effectively propagate your breeding program. But the premise here today is that downstream, particularly as it relates to commercial cow-calf producers, backgrounders, and feed yard operators, as well as even to the end consumer, there's more and more opportunity all the time to do a better job at farming data to make better decisions for profitability. It's always nice when the views of Zoetis and the views of the American Angus Association Board of Directors are aligned. And I was happy to see that relative to the September bullet points from the American Angus Association Board meeting, we're really nicely synergized with some of the underlying principles that Zoetis is pursuing as it relates to genetics. Namely, and I took the opportunity to paraphrase here, we're all about trying to create more profitable American Angus Association members as well as commercial users of Angus genetics. And we also, I think, share in common this pursuit to continuously expand and enhance Angus genetic evaluation as offered by AGI. And also then the underlying principle here is that we want breeders and commercial producers to have the tools to ever improve production efficiency up and down the beef supply chain. It goes without saying that across agriculture, we see a technification of what we are doing. And this is an example of what's happening in the crop world. For those of you that are farmers, this will come as no surprise. We see various technologies being married together. In other words, tools like GPS and soil maps, along with hybrid seeds and trait stacks, are blended together such that we optimize things throughout the crop production system. We think that's a precursor of things to come in the animal agriculture world, and we think that the future is at hand relative to helping to bring more technical precision to the ranching side of the business and use information more wisely. So what I'm here to talk to you about today are existing tools that we think could be more effectively integrated together with one another, such that both seed stock and commercial producers use them more effectively to make decisions, and so that we can also expand and enhance upon these tools in the future. So I'd like to touch briefly on HD50K for Angus, used by many of you that are Angus seed stock breeders, along with GeneMax Advantage, and then also talk briefly about how that integrates with Angus Link and value-added feeder cattle program for commercial users of Angus genetics. Most of you know the features of HD50K for Angus. They should come as no surprise. Along with parent verification, they include genomic enhanced expected progeny differences for all traits. And that is especially useful in that it increases the accuracy of the GEPDs for young non-parent animals, such that we make fewer breeding mistakes. Along with that, it goes without saying that with higher accuracy GEPDs for individual traits, we also add accuracy to the indexes that breeders and commercial users employ to make breeding decisions. In a minute, we'll also talk a little bit about reproductive or fertility haplotypes and how HD50K also informs those haplotypes for breeding decisions. And we'll also talk about what's happening in dairy with regard to haplotypes, such that we can use that to learn from, as Angus breeders have access to those sorts of things that's anticipated in the future. And finally, because some of the genetic conditions have markers on HD50K that inform the genotype, HD50K also allows us to more affordably and in a more timely manner deliver genetic condition information to Angus breeders. Now, the key benefit of HD50K for Angus is the increase in accuracy for young non-parent animals. Most of you have seen this table before, but I think it is the most effective means by which to explain what that added accuracy means. So when we contrast a tested Angus seed stock animal to one that's not tested, HD50K delivers an increase in accuracy that otherwise would require over 20 daughters on average with phenotypic information across the maternal traits. It also delivers what would otherwise require over 18 progeny with feeding information and growth information across those traits. And where that's especially informative is for a difficult and time-consuming to measure trait such as dry matter intake. And then finally, on the carcass traits, tested animals immediately achieve accuracy to what otherwise would require 14 progeny with actual carcass records, and many more records than that if it were to be driven exclusively by ultrasound scanned records. So in a nutshell, HD50K Angus seed stock are the equivalent to what otherwise would require a bull of having the better part of a first calf crop with performance data included in the evaluation, or for females, what otherwise would require 2 or maybe 3 lifetimes of natural calves with recorded performance. So it delivers increase in accuracy, and the bottom line is fewer breeding mistakes. So let's shift gears now and talk about the parallel product GeneMax Advantage for commercial users of Angus. Similar to HD50K, GeneMax Advantage determines sire parentage and supports registered and transferred Angus seed stock. If the commercial producer runs an AI program, it'll also validate the authenticity of pedigree information from AI sires that are used. GeneMax Advantage scores range from 1 to 100, generally with higher scores indicating more favorable genetic merit, and they're available for 10 traits, 5 maternal traits and 5 post-weaning and carcass traits. In addition to the individual traits, GeneMax Advantage includes customizable smart outliers where we identify those commercial Angus females that may represent excessive cow cost due to mature cow size and milk, may represent problems with docility, and also, in the name of certified Angus beef, may represent unfavorable outliers as it relates to Warner-Bratzler shear force and tenderness due to the calpain and calpistatin markers. In addition, to help make it easier to use all these different pieces of information, GeneMax Advantage includes 3 indexes, the cow, feeder, and total advantage index. These are roughly synonymous to the maternal, dollar beef, and dollar combined indexes available for Angus seed stock with slightly different trait weightings. And then in the future, we really think that since the genotyping platform is the same, GeneMax Advantage could support reporting of reproductive haplotypes. And in the future, there's all sorts of other potential features that might be added, namely genomic determination of sex, whereby certain sets of predictions could be made available for females, whereby if steer animals were tested, post-wean and carcass information could be available for that class, that sex category. As well, we know now that genomics can also inform predictions for breed composition, and that might also be informative for authentication of Angus breed genetic makeup. So for those of you that haven't seen or are not familiar with GeneMax Advantage, the results of the tests are rendered through the secured member section of the American Angus Association website. This is a screenshot of what the display of results looks like. And as you can see, we can customize the smart outliers. We report the 1 to 100 scores. Generally, higher scores are better for the maternal traits. for the feeding and carcass traits and for the indexes. As well, the results can be downloaded to PDF report or Excel for further use by the commercial cow-calf customer. Shifting gears to Angus Link, I was delighted to see the press release recently published from results of a special feeder calf sale regarding Angus Link and steers and heifers enrolled in value-added programs. Increasingly, we know that feeders appreciate this sort of information and are willing to give a premium for those that have genetic potential to perform above average relative to feedlot costs and rate of gain, as well as carcass merit and associated premiums. We think this is a precursor of things to come, and I'll show to you in a minute how at least one of our customers is using this combined information in their program to help take advantage of their use of Angus and Angus genetic evaluation tools. So I hope you can see that similar to the technification of agriculture and how multiple technologies are coming together to increase production efficiency, the same pieces of the puzzle or tools are available currently among Angus breeders and commercial users up and down the supply chain. So the idea is using HD50K to produce genomic enhanced EPDs from superior bulls, using GeneMax Advantage to select superior replacement heifers, and then using tools like Angus Link, where the genetic information is used to help inform price discovery, all go hand in hand to help breeders and commercial users of Angus. I'd like to share with you one story of a particular customer of ours that has quite effectively used each of these three tools to advance production efficiency and profitability in their operation. First and foremost, thank you to Jordan and Jenny Willis from Cokeville, Wyoming, for allowing us to share these results with you today. Jordan and Jenny recently have used all of these different tools, and they've been featured in other Angus publications. I believe there was an article about them in the Angus Beef Business Bulletin as well as in Beef Magazine. And I think they represent an example of what we'd like to see more of in the commercial marketplace with regard to making use of available information. Jordan and Jenny recently marketed a set of calves based on this affidavit that includes information about Angus Link. And I've circled down here in orange the genetic merit scorecard scores for their group of marketed feeder animals. These scores are designed to range from 0 to 200, 100 being average, and you can see their beef score that combines feedlot and carcass merit is 161, so way above average. Scores like this don't just happen by themselves, and they really are the result of producers like Jordan and Jenny using all the tools available. First and foremost, buying the best bulls based on superior genomic enhanced EPDs powered by 50K. Secondly, using GeneMax Advantage to select superior heifers, and their selection criteria is primarily on the total advantage score with some emphasis on other important individual traits and the other indexes. And then finally, as represented here, use of tools like the Genetic Merit Scorecard and Angus Link to help communicate to buyers the genetic merit of their groups of feeder cattle. Now you might ask the question, with feeder and carcass scores so high, have they managed to take care of genetic antagonisms that exist between those traits and maternal traits? So I thought I'd share with you the results of their testing and illustrate how they're using the technologies to manage those antagonisms. This particular table shows the genetic trends for Jordan and Jenny Willis's herd over the last 6 calf crops, starting in 2015 and ending here recently in delivered results for the 2020 born calves. And as the bar graphs indicate, for Cavanese maternal, they've managed to make continuous improvement in that trait, as well as in weaning weight. One of the traits we're emphasizing more in recent years is to try to improve heifer pregnancy but we've always managed to keep that above average, which is 50. And then by design, we've tried to maintain milk and mature cow weight more in the middle of the road so as to manage cow costs. Of notable exception is the last couple of years we've had a bit of an increase in milk production potential, and we're monitoring that carefully. However, given the relatively abundant feed resources that Jordan and Jenny have, so far, that has yielded heavier weaning weights, and we've been able to manage that. But it's an example of a trait in the GeneMax Advantage product that now we know that we're increasing milk, and in the future we may want to augment our decision making so as to optimize that if we think that it's went too high. So reflecting back on the genetic merit scorecard, this slide shows the genetic trend within the Willis herd for gain, which has constantly increased over the last 6 calf crops, as well as carcass weight, as well as marbling. And sometimes marbling and ribeye are antagonistically related. And one of the areas of emphasis in the recent breeding program would be improvement in ribeye area, which was realized in the latest calf crop of about 500 tested heifers. And by design, we've used the technologies, both HD50K and GeneMax Advantage, to optimize fat, whereby too much fat in fed cattle contributes to yield grade 4s and the inability to take cattle to heavier marcus weights. But on the flip side, maternally, too little fat may compromise cow fleshing ability. So we've used the technology to optimize that trait and try to stay in the middle of the road. It follows that we've also made improvements in that herd, both through sire selection based on HD50K as well as use of the GeneMax Advantage results to manage traits like tenderness, docility, and cow cost. Over the 6 years, 500 plus head of tested heifers per year, the Willises have done a masterful job of maintaining very low incidence of outliers for tenderness, improving docility from just over 20% unfavorable outliers to just 10%, and at the same time, manage outliers relative to cow cost. And you can see here in recent years, even though we've maintained constant cow weight, the increases in potential genetic merit for milk have caused the cow cost to drift slightly higher, and so that's another indicator that we're monitoring over time in their breeding program. Finally, you can see that as it relates to the cow, feeder, and total advantage indexes, there's a wonderful story to tell here about managing genetic antagonisms in a very large, actively managed and producing population to simultaneously improve the cow advantage index in green, the feeder advantage index in brown, and the total advantage index in orange. You might ask, well, what does that mean as it relates to predicted net returns for the Willis operation, having invested in both superior bulls as well as invested in GeneMax Advantage technology? Based on our knowledge of the total advantage and individual component segment indexes, we would predict that overall, when you benchmark the 2015 born calves with the 2020 born calves, we've averaged over $41 a head more in predicted net genetic merit across all maternal, feeding, and carcass traits. And if you assume all of the potential heifers for replacement produced 5 calves, those combined technologies would have added over $200 in predicted net return due to those combined improvements in genetic merit across all those traits. So it's a neat testament, we believe, as to what the technology can do to help the bottom lines of those commercial users of Angus genetics. Furthermore, one side benefit of the technology previously mentioned is sire assignment. And the Willises, in this particular example of the 2019 born animals, we do special analysis for them to determine the daughter counts of all the different bulls used either AI or in their natural service bull battery. And so it's a neat mechanism by which to hold bulls accountable, both for how prolific they are at producing and contributing daughters to the pool of replacements, But as well, it's interesting to look at the average genetic merit across groups of daughters for individual sires to inform those that are really getting the job done versus those that may not doing quite what was expected. So overall, I want to thank the Willises for allowing us to share that data. We think it's a neat story about how they are farming data to make the best bull buying decisions possible, to also keep the best heifers possible, and use that information in Angus Link to help market their calves for a premium. I'd like to shift gears now and just talk about what we think are a couple of opportunities as it relates to innovation, both on the trait and index front, as well as in the area of what we call decision support technology that can help seedstock and commercial producers alike digest all this information and end up making the best decisions possible. Along the way here, I would like to show some examples in dairy and briefly acquaint you with some of our work in dairy that we think could be informative to our Angus customers, both seedstock and commercial. We believe that there's distinct opportunities to create predictions for additional traits, particularly related to health, namely susceptibility to bovine respiratory disease, as well as opportunities within the Angus population on the reproduction and fertility front. Traits like stayability or longevity would be examples, and reproductive haplotypes are also a sliver of what is meant by more genetic tools to help inform reproductive merit. As well, I show a slide here of teat size and udder suspension scores. We think that's opportunity, especially for a strong, fundamentally maternal breed. And I also put that slide in here to remind me to really say hats off to Angus Genetics Inc. for their pursuit of genetic predictions for traits related to adaptability, namely pulmonary arterial pressure EPDs for propagating animals less susceptible to brisket disease at high altitudes. As well, I'm mindful of the experimental EPDs for hair shedding score that are hopefully indicators of animals' tolerance to fescue. And then finally, a ripe area of innovation opportunity would be on the bull front. So beyond scroll circumference, we know there's differences in the fertility among bulls. And predicting that, we think, might also be of merit in the times ahead. So let's jump ahead and talk a little bit about what's happening to dairy, particularly focusing on the health as well as the reproduction fronts. In dairy, Zoetis is quite proud of a product that we call Clarified Plus. And the way Clarified Plus works is that dairy producers submit samples to Zoetis for genotyping. We then forward the genotypes to the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding, who conduct parentage as well as base trait predictions across production, reproduction, and functional type. We at Zoetis use the genotypes to predict a whole host of cow wellness traits, calf wellness traits, as well as other traits. And then we also roll that information into what is called the Dairy Wellness Profit Dollar Index. And so as a precursor as to what Angus breeders might anticipate in the future, these combined cow and calf wellness traits actually compose right at 30% of the emphasis in the index. So we encourage Angus breeders to stay open-minded as new traits become available, particularly those that are economically relevant. And health usually results in either a treatment cost, morbidity, or mortality. So even though that health complex of traits is normally relatively lowly heritable, around 0.1, the economic consequence of the health event can be quite high. And so as those become available, it's only logical that they be judiciously included into our indexes. You might ask, do the health trait predictions really work? And so on this slide, I've shared some validation work where we've looked at the incidence of respiratory disease in animals that don't have their phenotypes contributing to the evaluation, but who we've tested, and we have genomic standalone predictions for respiratory disease. The line on the chart indicates genetic merit for each of the 4 groups, from the worst group for calf respiratory disease to the best group for susceptibility to respiratory disease, with the far right-hand group being the most bulletproof against getting sick. The blue bars represent the actual observed incidence of observed respiratory disease, or BRD. So as you can see, as you go from the worst to the best group, there's an increase there's actually a decrease as you go from the worst to the best group, from 15% of the worst group actually getting sick to only 9% of the best group getting sick. And so it is an example of how, even though a trait is lowly heritable, if we have the phenotypes, and I'd encourage you and your association to begin gathering health event phenotypes, those predictions can be quite meaningful. They absolutely work, and they should be integrated into our various selection objectives. So finally, I'd like to speak a little bit to you about reproductive or fertility haplotypes that we understand are on the horizon for Angus breeders. In dairy, these of course have been shown to be of large potential economic impact to producers that may have been incurred in the past without knowledge of reproductive haplotypes. In Holstein, as an example, there's about 5 such haplotypes, all of which that are very low incidence, from only 1 to maybe just shy of 3 animals per 100 in the population that would be carriers. And I would remind you that what is meant really by a reproductive haplotype is that in our high-density genotyping efforts, in rare instances we find times where there's no animals in the population that are homozygous recessive at certain locations. And upon further analysis and work, we've discovered that whenever 2 of these adverse reproductive haplotypes combined, in other words, the mating of a carrier male to a carrier female, 25% of the time we'll get a calf, an embryo if you will, that inherits 2 copies of the defective reproductive haplotype. Then and there is only when we actually see the absorption or the loss of that animal in utero sometime during gestation. So we encourage you to keep these all in perspective. Typically they're a very low incidence, and upon even the low incidence, even when 2 carriers are mated, only 25% of the time will they adversely affect express reproduction. And so just to build on that a little bit, we developed this slide as it relates to the Angus fertility haplotypes that are anticipated in the times ahead. I would remind you that theoretically, these could be managed both at the seedstock level among HD50K tested animals, as well as at the commercial level for customers like Jordan and Jenny Willis, who have a population or a cow inventory now that are GeneMax Advantage tested. The same haplotypes can be derived from both of these platforms. Obviously, you as Angus breeders or commercial users of Angus have 2 or 3 different avenues to manage these conditions. The most drastic would be to cull all carriers, and generally that's probably not necessarily advised, because we could lose genetically elite animals across other performance traits if we do so. Rather, in the dairy world, we found it more effective to merely manage the carrier matings. So once you know which cows in your inventory or replacement heifers in your inventory are carriers, we'd simply never mate those to a bull that was carrier, and we'd never then suffer the adverse consequence of these fertility haplotypes. And it also goes without saying, as indicated on the bottom of this slide, is that just as we don't ever practice single trait selection, we probably wouldn't ever advise practicing single gene selection as it relates to a fertility haplotype. In other words, there could be animals that are reproductively quite superior and elite that just happen to carry one low frequency but deleterious fertility haplotype. So we encourage customers to keep this kind of information in perspective. We think that it can be very effectively managed. And one such way it can be managed is through decision support. advanced decision support software, such as MateCell. And we've had wonderful experiences these last 2 years working with Angus customers of HD50K to help in their mating decisions. And briefly, the way MateCell works is it uses the pedigree, EPD, as well as index information and breeding objectives determined by the breeder to optimize all the individual trait and index goals, as well as desired levels of inbreeding. As well, it can manage the fertility haplotypes so that never is a carrier cow mated to a carrier bull. And then it can also be used to optimize the genetic risk as determined by you, the breeder. In other words, you can tell the software the proportion of animals you want mated to higher accuracy versus lower accuracy bulls, such that all the things on the slide as well as risk are managed. We're not proposing that MateCell replace good cowboy common sense in the mating decisions. Rather, MateCell returns to you, the breeder, a prioritized list of sires to mate to each female, such that you then can make the final determination according to other traits that are not evaluated that also might be important to your breeding program to optimize throughout the process. We think tools such as MateCell that help assimilate all sorts of disparate information into the best decision to optimize trade-offs between traits with the goal of maximizing net returns are really important elements to the future of cattle breeding, both as it relates to seed stock and downstream for commercial producers. Finally, I want to once again say thank you to those of you that are our customers of HD50K, and thank you to those of you that are users of GeneMax Advantage. We at Zoetis appreciate your business, and we're committed to advancing these technologies for your benefit in the future. We'd like to share with you that our work in Angus and in genomics is only part of our portfolio. We think that it is an important foundational element that helps with the prediction of merit and the determination of which animals to propagate and which to not. But we also know that for best results, that also comes with herd health programs to prevent disease in the first place. So with that, thank you for your time and thank you for the opportunity. And once again, we appreciate your business.